Hi, it's Vernon again. In this video, we'll explore 4 moments in later life where silence becomes a form of strength, and why focusing on yourself, instead of trying to be heard, leads to deeper peace after 60. As we grow older, something curious happens. The more we try to explain ourselves, the more distant others seem to become. Words that once held weight now feel overlooked. We keep speaking up, believing that if we assert our thoughts clearly, we'll regain value, that our voice will reaffirm our worth. But here's a quiet truth. The more we chase recognition through words, the more invisible we often feel. In our effort to be heard, we risk exhausting ourselves and still not being understood. That's when we begin to realize not every moment calls for a voice. Sometimes, the greatest form of strength is knowing when to stay silent, especially in the 4 situations we're about to explore. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more people find these reflections, and maybe find a little piece of their own too. Let's begin with the first situation, when proving your worth starts to feel urgent. If you speak just to be seen, you risk showing you've forgotten your own value. In that moment, silence protects your dignity more than any word can. Situation 1. When your voice is dismissed by loved ones. Imagine you're sitting at a family dinner. Everyone's chatting. Laughter fills the air. You offer a thoughtful comment, maybe share a piece of advice, and suddenly, the energy shifts. Someone interrupts. Another changes the topic. Your words dissolve into the noise, unnoticed. What follows isn't always anger. Sometimes, it's something subtler and harder to name. A dull ache in the chest. A quiet sense of vanishing. You realize you're no longer the center of their world, perhaps no longer even part of their consideration. And when that realization stings, the impulse is to speak again, louder this time, to prove, I still matter. But Epictetus once said, if someone speaks badly of you, do not defend yourself against the accusations, but reply, he obviously does not know me very well, since he thinks that of me. This is the spirit of inner sovereignty, of knowing yourself so deeply that the noise around you cannot shake your truth. Raising your voice in desperation doesn't reclaim power, it reveals dependence on recognition. And in that moment, you're not standing in your dignity, you're bargaining with it. So how do we respond? Gently and wisely. We turn inward, not out of retreat, but to honor something quieter within us. In this kind of silence, we stop asking to be seen and begin seeing ourselves. It is a soft return to what truly matters, our inner clarity, our joy, our peace. Perhaps it's tending a garden, walking at sunrise, reading philosophy, or playing music for no one but yourself. These acts, though unseen by others, build something unshakable within self-respect. True strength in later life doesn't come from being heard, it comes from being whole. Because the deepest kind of presence, the one people eventually feel without you saying a word, is born from inner contentment. The Stoics remind us of a liberating truth. While the world beyond us shifts in chaos, our inner response is entirely our own. When voices clash or our presence is overlooked, silence becomes more than restraint. It becomes a quiet return to the self. In that stillness, we remember peace isn't found in being heard, but in being whole. So we've seen that when your voice is dismissed, silence protects your dignity and anchors you in self-worth. But what happens when it's not your words being ignored, it's someone else's chaos trying to pull you in? That brings us to the second situation, one even quieter, yet just as defining. Situation 2. When others seek conflict, choose stillness. There comes a moment when you're pulled into an argument that isn't yours. A family member unloads their frustration. A friend blames you for something you never said. or perhaps someone from your past resurfaces, bringing old wounds with them. Your instinct might be to defend, to correct the story, to clear your name. But ask yourself, is the truth at risk, or just your pride? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion." It sounds simple, but it's deeply powerful. Silence in the face of provocation is not weakness. It's restraint. It's saying, I know who I am, and I will not lower my peace to match someone else's chaos. When we engage every time someone throws anger our way, we become reactive, not reflective. And reactivity drains us. I remember once being drawn into a heated conversation with a relative, not because I disagreed, but because I didn't want to seem weak. I raised my voice. I defended every point, and when it was over, nothing had changed, except I felt depleted, unsettled. That moment taught me something. When you trade your peace for a response, you always lose more than you gain. Now, I choose to protect my energy, because not every fire needs your breath to keep burning. Now, tell me, have you ever been in a situation like that? One where your words only led to more tension, and peace felt further away? If so, I'd love to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else see things more clearly, or feel a little less alone. Instead, let your calm be the boundary. You don't need to prove yourself every moment. Sometimes, the most dignified response is simply to let the moment pass without feeding it. This kind of silence says, I value my peace more than I need to win this argument. And that, in itself, is a quiet kind of victory. But not all storms come from others. Sometimes, the urge to speak arises from within, a different kind of discomfort, one tied not to conflict, but to loneliness. That's where we turn next. Situation 3. When loneliness demands to be filled with noise. Blaise Pascal once wrote, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. His words speak not only to isolation, but to the deep discomfort of facing ourselves without distraction. That restlessness, the need to fill silence with noise, words, or activity, often clouds what the soul is quietly trying to reveal. There are evenings when the silence in the room feels heavier than it should. The phone hasn't rung, the house is still. And in that quiet, something inside you whispers, maybe I should call someone, post something, say anything, not because there's something to say, but because the silence feels too loud. I remember one evening last winter, sitting alone in the kitchen as the kettle cooled untouched. I had just finished dinner. Simple, quiet, uneventful. And yet, without thinking, I picked up my phone and began recording a voice message to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't have anything meaningful to say. I just needed to speak, to remind myself that someone might still be listening, that I still had a voice. But halfway through, I deleted the message. Not out of shame, but because I realized I wasn't really reaching out to them. I was trying to escape myself. In those moments, it's tempting to speak just to remind the world, and maybe yourself, that you still exist. But here's a gentle truth I've come to learn. Loneliness isn't always asking to be fixed. Sometimes, it's asking to be felt. And if this message is resonating with you so far, don't forget to like this video. It helps the quiet voices like ours reach those who need it most, and also reminds me that these reflections truly matter to someone out there. Instead of reaching outward, what if you stayed with the silence a little longer? What if you asked it, what part of me is seeking attention right now? What am I really missing? When we sit with our loneliness, truly sit with it, we begin to see that it's not a void, but a mirror. And often, it reflects the parts of us we've neglected. The inner child who wants warmth, the dream we've shelved, the quiet longing we've buried beneath obligations. So rather than fill the silence with noise, fill it with presence. Light a candle. Play music that nourishes. Write, even if no one reads it. Let your solitude be sacred, not shameful. Because there's a kind of silence that doesn't isolate, it heals. And when you befriend that silence, you'll find that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. It's the beginning of coming home to yourself. But there's another silence we must explore. One that arises not in moments of hurt or conflict, but in the company of others who take us for granted. Let's step into the fourth and final situation. Situation 4. When you're being taken for granted. A silence takes shape, not from absence of words, but from the weight of being continuously expected, never acknowledged. Picture a candle that burns in the middle of a room. Its flame glows, warming those around it without fanfare. People walk by, comforted by its presence, yet never stop to notice it, until its light grows weak, and only then do they feel the loss. That silence is the echo of being assumed, of giving and giving, until your presence fades into background noise. Not because you weren't needed, but because your giving was so dependable, it became invisible. You may have been that candle, steady, constant, quietly giving. And when your light starts to flicker, not from weakness but from weariness, the silence that surrounds you isn't just about being unseen, it's about being expected. You were that steady flame, the one who stayed late, picked up the phone, made the quiet sacrifices no one asked for. And now, when you need even a moment of care or presence, what comes instead is delay, excuse, or absence. It's not just the silence that hurts. It's the realization that you've become part of the background, reliable, constant, and taken for granted. The temptation is to say something, to remind them, to list everything you've done. But here's the deeper truth. The moment you start justifying your worth to those who've grown used to it, you begin to lose something precious, your own sense of quiet dignity. Instead, withdraw with grace. Let your silence say, I will not beg to be valued. This isn't about punishing others. It's about no longer abandoning yourself. That time, that care, that presence, redirect it toward yourself, toward people who show up without being asked, toward spaces where you're not just needed, you're seen. I've watched this unfold in my own life, with my father, a quiet man, full of wisdom, who spent years helping others, solving problems, giving more than anyone ever asked. And yet, in his later years, I saw how rarely people asked how he was doing, how often they expected him to listen, but not to speak. One day he said to me, I don't mind being quiet, son, but I've learned, if you keep offering without pause, people will forget you're not a resource, you're a person. That stayed with me, because his silence wasn't bitterness, it was a choice, a boundary, a form of self-respect. And it reminded me that sometimes the most graceful thing we can do is to stop explaining our worth and start honoring it ourselves. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Don't waste it proving your worth to those who've stopped noticing. Use that silence to create room for what honors you, because sometimes the boldest act of love is withdrawing your light from where it's no longer appreciated and letting it warm the places that welcome it without demand." Conclusion: the quiet power that stays with you. If there's one truth that echoes through all these situations, it's this: silence, when chosen with wisdom, is not an absence, it's a presence of peace, of self-worth, of clarity. In youth, we're taught to speak, to be heard, to assert, to prove. But with age comes a deeper knowing that not every truth needs an audience, and not every battle requires our voice. In the later chapters of life, The power often lies not in expression, but in discernment. Silence becomes not a retreat, but a quiet declaration. I know who I am, and I no longer need every room to reflect that. In choosing silence, we are not stepping away from life. We are stepping deeper into it. Silence, when born from clarity, is an act of self-restoration. It allows us to gather what has been scattered by noise, expectation, and obligation. In that inward turning, we rediscover our worth, not as something that must be spoken to be real, but as something quietly inherent, something that never needed permission to exist. It's here, in this sacred space of stillness, that true belonging begins, not with others, but within ourselves. You've seen what happens when you protect your dignity from dismissal, your peace from conflict, your soul from the pull of loneliness, and your light from those who forget its value. Each silence wasn't emptiness. It was a redirection, a way back to yourself. And maybe that's the final gift of growing older, the ability to let go of noise, and in doing so, finally hear the sound of your own truth. As Carl Jung once observed, solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living. In silence, we are not diminished. We are returned to ourselves, whole and unshaken. If this video gave you something to reflect on, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd like, share, or subscribe. Not just to support this channel, but to pass these insights along so that others walking the same path can find their strength quietly, just as you have. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care and keep choosing the kind of silence that speaks volumes. And I'm Vernon. Thanks for watching.